What is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast with Justin and Brandon. Oscar Piastri wins his second race of the year. Yuki Tsunoda finally scores points in that second Red Bull seat, and we saw more passes in one lap this weekend than we might have the entire Grand Prix in Suzuka. A lot happened in Bahrain. We're here to talk about all of it. Brandon, how you feeling?
Feeling great. It was a fantastic race, honestly. Much needed after Suzuka. Not that Suzuka was bad, but very different track, very different environment, and that was refreshing. So feeling good.
Hey, we're allowed to admit that Suzuka wasn't the greatest race. This is a safe place. We can say something like that. The Bahrain Grand Prix certainly was better. There was action all throughout the Grand Prix, all throughout the field. Just Max Verstappen pitting and coming out in P20 shows you just how close the field was all weekend long. Kind of sad that we're seeing this regulation come to an end because the field is close. I'm enjoying it. Let's get right into it with our one sentence rundown. So, Brandon, what was your one sentence rundown from the Bahrain Grand Prix?
Is can McLaren manage two number one drivers? I think we're seeing Oscar getting a lot closer to Lando. And I mean, all weekend long, he was the faster car this weekend. And that I think is going to provide a little bit of action for us and quite a few problems for McLaren as those two drivers get closer in the championship and closer in the races. Um, I think that's McLaren's biggest weakness is just the management of their drivers and strategy decisions when they're close in the race. They weren't that close at any point in the race this weekend, so I don't think we saw a lot of that, but I think things are heating up and it's going to come to a head at some point. So can McLaren manage two number one drivers? We'll have to wait and see.
McLaren was spared having to make any management decisions this weekend because Lando qualified so far down the grid. And even though he had a great start, that he was maybe aided by being outside of his grid box in, and that penalty set him back a little bit. He was never really close to Oscar on track. It was a pretty dominant win for Oscar Piastri, so McLaren didn't have to make any of those decisions. But you are definitely right. We have seen McLaren struggle when it has come to managing both of those drivers and deciding who they're going to pit first, who they're going to give the preferential strategy to, when they're going to switch the drivers. It feels like no matter what they pick, they always pick the wrong one. So we'll be able to see if they can rectify that moving forward. My one sentence rundown is we are finally getting the championship fight we deserve. We hyped it up. We'll take blame for this. Everyone in some form of Formula One media hyped 2025 up as the best season of Formula One we could ever have. And then we showed up to preseason testing and we were like, woof, McLaren is like a business day ahead of the rest of the field. This is not great. But since we've started the season, it's kind of looking like we might actually get that championship fight. We've got the two McLaren drivers seeming to be even closer this year than they were last year. George Russell is somehow being incredibly consistent and kind of getting his name towards the top of the championship standings. Max Verstappen is doing his best to haul that tractor up. So even though after testing, maybe we weren't super, convinced we were going to have a championship fight or after the first few races that we saw McLaren dominate, but as we've gotten further and further into the season, I am pretty convinced we're going to have a great championship fight this year.
No, absolutely. I mean, it did kind of look maybe like McLaren was going to run away with things, but yeah, we have a fantastic fight on our hands. We've got like five drivers within like, I don't know, 15 points, 20 points of the lead. So it's going to be really exciting. And we're only 4 rounds into the season, so we have 20 more races.
Yeah, and having that many drivers that close at the top isn't that uncommon after four races, but being able to see that we could theoretically see a path for each of them to make a run at the championship in the remaining 20 races, that is what gets me super excited for the rest of this year. Our first question from the Bahrain Grand Prix is Oscar Piastri the new number one at McLaren? He has looked faster than Lando Norris for 3 races in a row. He was clearly ahead at China. Japan, you could make the argument that Oscar Piastri was looking faster at the end of that race and should have been allowed to pass Lando. And then again this weekend in Bahrain, he's closed the qualifying gap down. Now he's got 2 poles on the season, and we said that was where he really needed to improve. He has done that. Lando kind of looks like he's feeling the pressure, making a few mistakes, not maximizing that car, maximizing the weekend. So should we view Oscar Piastri as the new number one at McLaren?
I think the argument can definitely be made. I don't know if you can definitely say that Oscar is 100% number one. And if you ask Zach McLaren or Zach Brown, not Zach McLaren, if you ask Zach Brown, he would just say they have two number one drivers, which, whatever. That's what they're going to say until one of them leaves the team. Um, yeah, Oscar's definitely looked faster, and he's just shown a lot of measured improvement. And we talked about it earlier before the season started. Is if Oscar can maximize points on tracks that he didn't do well at last year, uh, mainly just any track that isn't in Europe, then he's probably looking pretty good for the European portion of the season. So Oscar's done that so far.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when this question came up is like these are tracks that Oscar Piastri didn't have his strongest run of the season at last year. And so if we go back to the European portion of the calendar and Oscar Piastri repeats what he did last year, then you've got to say he's putting himself in quite a good position to make a run at the championship this year.
Absolutely. And to have an Australian driver win the Formula One World Championship, I think that entire country would just go absolutely berserk. So that'd be amazing.
Yeah, and then we can already look forward to the season opener in 2026 and it just being absolutely insane. It's just a cycle of incredible Formula One if Oscar Piastri somehow wins the World Championship this year. Our next question, continuing to talk about the championship, is George Russell a secret championship contender? He has been incredibly consistent to start the season. You know, he's finished in the top five in every single race, finished on the podium multiple weekends this year, got a wonderful P2 this year. Looked like he was almost going to somehow get pole. The Mercedes feels like it's clearly the second fastest car. I think I'm pretty confident in saying that. Ferrari has been a disappointment this year. I feel like Mercedes is clearly that car that is right behind McLaren. And the McLaren drivers, they keep taking points off of each other. This is what we were talking about going into the season, that with them having two number one drivers, you would have races where they're not getting the max amount of points that they could get individually because they keep taking points off of each other. And George Russell just kind of being in the shadows, finishing ahead of one of the McLarens every single week, building up his points tally, not letting them get too far out of reach. If that Mercedes, they bring a couple upgrades, he gets some good luck to go his way. Maybe we shouldn't count out George Russell in the championship.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that we can't count out Lando, Oscar, Max, and George at this point. Those are four drivers that I definitely see a path for. And if George can do what he, has been known to do, which is just be incredibly consistent, then I see that there's no reason why you would count him out. I mean, like you said, he's gotten several podiums already this season, finished P2 this weekend ahead of one of the McLarens. Uh, Very nearly lost it, but was able to keep Lando behind. I think there's no reason to count George out. He's a great driver.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we've seen from George over the past, 4 seasons that he's been in Formula One is that he has been consistently fast. Every single weekend he shows up, he's quick. We've seen some silly mistakes, we've seen some driver errors from him. But to start this year, I would almost call it a flawless season from George Russell. I mean, maybe qualifying in Japan kind of hurt him a little bit, but outside of that, I feel like he has maximized that Mercedes and then some. He's clearly stepped into the team leader role at Mercedes. And so, yeah, I mean, I've got to say right now, I think it would be foolish to count out George Russell from the championship.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, there were questions going into the season is like, how is George going to do in the team leader role? Is Kimmy going to come in here and like blow George out of the water? Is it going to be a close teammate battle? I mean, so far this season, George has had the upper hand, and Kimmy has not been slow by any right of his own, but George has been more consistent and better. I mean, Kimmy's just barely turned 18 years old, so you would expect him to be maybe just a slight step behind George Russell. But yeah, George has had a great season so far.
I mean, that was the joke all weekend long is that Kimi Antonelli would finish a session and had to go do his math homework so he can graduate high school. So, yeah, I mean, it is kind of insane seeing what he's doing at such a young age. Speaking of Kimi Antonelli, man, some of those overtakes he was pulling this weekend, they were incredible. He was sending it from, I think, still in Japan. So he's got a bright future ahead of him, that is for sure. But George Russell clearly has a hand on that team leadership role at Mercedes. Let's just keep talking about the championship from a different angle. This time, Max Verstappen. We heard it from Max Verstappen in the Red Bull camp this weekend that if they keep having performances like this, they're out of the championship fight. And I would agree if they keep having performances like this, but there are talks of a big upgrade package coming at Imola. Obviously, we know that when the new flexi wing relegation comes in, that'll bring McLaren back towards Red Bull a little bit. But I mean, Max Verstappen struggled hard to get P6 this weekend. I mean, like a last lap overtake on Pierre Gasly was the best that he could do. Other than that, I mean, if that's what that car can get all year, then I would say Max is out of the championship fight. But I wouldn't expect P6 to become the norm for Max Verstappen.
I definitely agree. I think, and I mean, you tend to see this, and I feel like specifically with Red Bull a lot is, they have one poor weekend, and then it's like, all right, well, we're screwed for the rest of the year. And Max tends to kind of sometimes over dramatize the negative results, just because Max is a very blunt person and it sounds a lot worse coming from his mouth than maybe it actually is. But we've seen Red Bull be fantastic with development over the course of the years, especially in this regulation. So I would definitely not expect that to be the norm, and I think we can't count Max out at this point yet. Maybe if 10 races down the line, we're still seeing these kinds of results. It's like, all right, maybe it's over. But Max Verstappen is still Max Verstappen, so he's not going to just fly over and let the championship roll on by. So
Yeah, I mean, because it's Max Verstappen, I don't want to count him out, but Red Bull are now missing a certain key figure that was in charge of that development and upgrade path. So, we'll start to see the effects of missing Adrian Newey. Maybe we already are with this car being so terrible. I think really just the answer for Red Bull is probably just let Helmut Marko stop speaking to the public. We wouldn't be having this big thing about how they're so terrible if Helmut Marko wouldn't come out after every single race saying that the car's a tractor and the car's terrible and the second driver sucks and just this whole thing. And so there's just so much drama around Red Bull constantly. And it seems like everything we're talking about with them is stuff that's off track. And then when we get on track, it's like, oh, yeah, P6, whatever, whoopee, there we go. But the fact that Max Verstappen just won last week in this exact same car, like I feel like we're quick to forget that. You're only as good as your last race in Formula One. So we see that Red Bull really struggle this week, and we're like, hey, they just won 7 days ago. And so it's like in the right conditions, that car still works. Max still
yeah,
works for that car, and hopefully the car is going to get better as the year goes on. So yes, it would be absolutely foolish to count out Max Verstappen right now.
yeah. I mean, Helmet came out today and said, he's really concerned that Max is going to leave at the end of the season. So again, just taking the focus, anything that they are doing that takes the focus away from what's happening on track and creates, this drama, these rumors, all that stuff. It's just hurting them, I think, at the end of the day, because what they really need to do is focus on the car. How can they maximize it? How can they develop it in the right direction? Um, so we'll see what happens, but
Well, that's just the constant cycle that we're in, is that it's rumored Max is going to go to Mercedes or Aston, and then someone in the paddock says no, and then 2 weeks later, the whole thing's back, and we just go in that cycle. So I'm not going to read too far into that until anything more official than Helmut Marko comes out with that being an actual thing. Let's talk about some things that didn't happen necessarily at the front of the grid this weekend at the Bahrain Grand Prix because things got pretty wild in the midfield. Pierre Gasly, insane qualifying, second row of the grid after the Mercedes received their one-place grid penalties, scored his first points of the season in P7, double points for Haas. That was an incredibly impressive performance. Esteban Ocon pulling off the undercut of dreams, and then Ollie Behrman coming from P20 to score a point as well. Yuki Tsunoda scores his first points in the Red Bull. That's the first points that the Red Bull second car has scored since like 4 races left in last season, I think. And then Carlos Sainz Q3 appearance looked strong this weekend. This was like the first weekend of the year that it looked like he had the edge over Alex Albon, and then his race just came undone. Side pod damage, contact with Yuki Tsunoda, safety car, and then he ends up having to retire. So a lot of things happen in the midfield. Even when there's action going on at the front, there's a lot of action going through the entire grid as well.
yeah, it was a great race from that perspective as well. Fantastic job by Pierre. Ended up starting the race in P4, which is amazing. Definitely what Alpine needed after kind of a rough start to the season. Scored great points for the team there. And then, yeah, Yuki had a great weekend, honestly. Q3, and then double points for Red Bull. It's the first time in a while that we've seen that, so that's good. Maybe a step in the right direction for them. And I definitely expected Yuki to kind of step up and perform this weekend after a rough start. But yeah, it was great action all up and down the field.
If you're Red Bull, you've got to feel good about Yuki Tsunoda's performance this weekend. That's probably the one bright spot. Everything else you did, from the pit stops to the car you brought, was absolutely horrible. But for the Red Bull car to struggle as much as it did this weekend, and to see Max Verstappen struggle, and this be the weekend that Yuki Tsunoda takes a step forward, gets it into Q3, gets that monkey off his back to say, okay, now I've made it into Q3. I've done that. I've scored points. I've checked the boxes, a little bit of pressure off. I think you've got to feel good about that part of your weekend leaving Bahrain if you're Red Bull.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you think about it from the perspective of like, this was Yuki's track that he has probably the most driving experience on because of testing, because he's raced here plenty of times in the past. If he didn't do well this weekend, then I think it's like, oh gosh, what have we gotten ourselves into here? But, for him to step up and perform that well and be honestly close to Max all throughout the race is, key. So that's great.
Yeah, good weekend for Yuki. Good step in the right direction. Let's talk about our predictions from the Bahrain Grand Prix. Going into this weekend, you were up 9-5. I needed a good weekend to close this gap down some. Spoiler alert, it did not happen. Podium pusher of the weekend, I said Yuki Tsunoda, and I lined out the terms and conditions that if he made Q3 and scored points, I was going to claim this as a correct prediction, and he did it. Q3, something that a Red Bull car hasn't done this year. Scored points, something the second Red Bull car hasn't done this year. So I absolutely am claiming this podium pusher of the weekend point.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's no way I can argue against that. It was a great weekend from Yuki. I picked George Russell for my podium push of the weekend. George had a great weekend. Very nearly was on pole, finished the race in P2. Great points for Mercedes, consistent drive. So
Yeah, George Russell was probably the second best driver this weekend behind Oscar Piastri. So I'm glad he finished second. Glad he had the qualifying he did. He deserves podium pusher of the weekend point for sure. Backmarker of the weekend, I said Jack Doohan, which I'm going to claim as a point. And you might be thinking to yourself, Justin, he had his best qualifying in Formula One. It wasn't a terrible race. Yeah, I understand that. But here's my thinking behind this, and you're more than welcome to argue this if you want. He was leading Pierre Gasly the entire weekend, and then when we get to Q2, the qualifying session, it matters. He doesn't deliver. He doesn't have a good lap, and Pierre Gasly puts that car on the second row of the grid. And then when it comes to the race, Pierre Gasly is fighting Max Verstappen, and Jack Doohan would have finished P15 if Liam Lawson didn't have a penalty and promote him a place. And so, for the sheer potential that was in that car, how we started the weekend looking like he was ahead of Pierre Gasly, and then for him to finish it the way that he did and not come away with any points, not make Q3, I think that's a real disappointment for Jack Doohan.
yeah, I agree with that. I think, while it wasn't the worst weekend ever from Jack, it was probably one of his better weekends so far in his Formula One career.
It was the
The
only
gap
weekend he didn't crash, so probably his best weekend so far.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, I mean, the gap to Pierre just kind of highlights, you know, while there was more potential in the car, he didn't maximize it, and that's not what Alpine needs. So you've got Franco Colapinto just chomping at the bit to get his opportunity. We'll
That's
see.
all the comment sections on any Alpine Instagram post is all just Argentinian fans chanting for Franco Colapinto to be in that car.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's a rough place to be if you're Jack doing.
Absolutely. Who was your back marker of the weekend this weekend?
My back marker of the weekend was Fernando Alonso, and it just wasn't the best weekend from Fernando. It wasn't the worst weekend from Fernando. So I mean, I don't think I can really claim a point because I mean Fernando has been pretty consistent this season. Well, not amazing. He has been consistent. So
Yeah, I can't believe he's still behind Lance Stroll in the standings. That would be insane to me if somehow this Aston Martin just stays in no man's land all year long. Fernando doesn't score and Lance somehow beats Fernando Alonso. That would be absolutely insane. I mean, yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, I'm sure Fernando got the maximum out of the car. He even came on the radio and said that he got the absolute maximum after qualifying. It's just that car is horrible. Nothing bad happened to Fernando, so unfortunately, can't give him that back marker point. Pole, I said Lando Norris. Stupid me. That one was incorrect.
And I said Oscar Piastri, so it's a point for me.
Unbelievable. Podium prediction. I said Oscar Piastri in P3, which was incorrect.
And I said Lando Norris in P3, which actually is correct.
Hold on. I really feel like this isn't what you predicted. Didn't you put George in P3, Lando in P2, and Oscar in P1 because you changed it last second? I'm 98% sure that's what
Yeah, no, no,
happened
no.
in
You're
the
right. You're right. You're
episode,
right.
and
You're
I
right.
wrote it down on this sheet wrong because I just copied it.
No, you're right. Yeah.
You're
I
right.
put,
So you said George Russell in P3, Lando in P2,
yeah, yeah,
Oscar in P1. So the point is no, you don't get a point for that.
yeah. No point.
There we go. All right, we're on the same page here. I said Max Verstappen in P2, which is incorrect. No point for me.
And I said Lando Norris in P2, which is incorrect.
And in P1, I put Lando Norris, which was incorrect.
And I said Oscar Piastri is going to win, and he sure did.
Yes, he did in convincing fashion. Our one push and prediction. I've said that at least two drivers would DNF this weekend, and only one, Mr. Carlos Sainz, did not finish, so that is incorrect for me.
And I said that Yuki Tsunoda scores a top seven finish in every session this weekend, which honestly was so bold.
Yeah, that one was really bold. I don't think he was top seven in any session this week,
Yeah,
so
yeah. So that's a big no for
that should
me.
be -1 points for you being that wrong, but that's not in the rule book, so I won't do it. The fans at Daniel_Marsh_ said Yuki Tsunoda finishes in the top five, which was incorrect. And at JJ has faith in Jesus, Max Verstappen wins again, which was incorrect. So tough weekend for the fans right there. And you increased your lead. It is now 12-7 you, which is unbelievable. I'm having a horrible season to start this year. I don't know what's going on, but apparently you know more wheel than I do.
I mean, the numbers don't lie. So that's
Oh,
all I got to say
unbelievable.
about it.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, that is all we've got for our reactions to the Bahrain Grand Prix. Let us know what you thought of this Grand Prix in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe, like, follow, do all of the things. Before you go, Brandon, what are your parting podium thoughts?
Got one more race this coming weekend, the end of a triple header, which is super exciting. So it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, it felt wild to have Bahrain be the fourth race of the season. And now it feels like we're starting the season all over again. I've got that beginning of the year energy, even though we're like about to be 5 races in when we go to Saudi. So that will be incredible. Thank you for watching and listening to the Podium Pushers podcast. As always, we will see you later in the week to predict the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. But until then, have a great day and God bless.
See ya.